Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen and my garden, or a very small square of my garden. This is rhubarb. If you've never seen rhubarb before growing, that's what it looks like. About 4 years ago, my grandparents gave me a little bit of a section of their rhubarb, and I came home and I transplanted it into that spot that you saw. And it is just getting bigger and bigger every year. You saw how big some of those stalks are, and they're just huge. Of course, you cut the leaves off because the leaves are not safe for eating. But rhubarb is so easy to grow, you almost can't get rid of it. Ask my grandma. She has tried to get rid of her plant so many times, and it just keeps coming back. And I remember as a little kid, my grandma always had rhubarb in her yard. And she used to give us a stalk of rhubarb and a cup of sugar. And we would take our cup of sugar and our rhubarb and we dip it into the cup of sugar and eat it. We don't do that anymore, but that's what we used to do as kids. And then for a long time, I didn't like rhubarb. I thought it tasted like dirt. But as I get older, I realize that I actually really do like it. And it's such a nutritious plant. And it's so easy to grow. I almost don't do anything to it. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger every year. And I know a lot of people don't like rhubarb. I have 2 rhubarb recipes up here on my channel, and they're not very popular. Actually, I have 3. I have a cheesecake, I have my rhubarb raisin cranberry relish, and then my strawberry rhubarb pie. But it's such a useful vegetable. You can pair it with fruit and make a dessert. You can pair it with vegetables and make a side dish. So many uses, so nutritious. If you've never had it or you didn't like it as a kid, I encourage you to try it as an adult. You might find that your tastes have changed and you do like it now. So this is a lot more rhubarb than what I will need for my recipe today. And I have quite a bit more in the sink that is also not going to be in the recipe for today. And I also have more out there that I can harvest and use for other purposes. I have a lot of different ideas of what I'm going to do with a lot of this rhubarb. In years past, I will just wash it and cut it up and put it in the freezer and use for pies or different things later on. I actually made, about 2 months ago, I made some rhubarb fig marmalade. Man, that turned out really good. I didn't film it because I don't think a lot of people enjoy rhubarb, so I wasn't sure if I should film it or not, so I didn't. But if you're interested, I might make more, and if you're interested in seeing that recipe, let me know in the comments and I will make it, because I have a lot of rhubarb. The rhubarb fig marmalade that I made, the reason I made it a couple of months ago is because I saw how big my plant was getting, and I had some frozen rhubarb from last year that needed to be taken care of. If you recently saw my Fig Newton cookies, that rhubarb fig marmalade would actually be a really good filling for a Fig Newton cookie. The figs are so delicious with rhubarb. I was so surprised. I also have some other ideas. I want to try some of this rhubarb in maybe a pickle of some kind. I also really would like to try some bacon jam. And I want to put rhubarb in that. I think it would be a really delicious thing to put in bacon jam. Although that won't be for a few more months until my tomatoes come on. If you're interested in that recipe, let me know and I'll film it. I'm just going to cut up what I need for the recipe for today, and then the rest of it will actually go in the freezer. And I've got everything ready for my recipe. Of course, I do need to take care of my rhubarb first, and then we'll get to that. So all I'm going to do to get this ready is just cut off kind of the root ends here, and then cut into pieces, and then we're going to scald it in some boiling water. And I'm just going bite-sized pieces, or a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to measure out 3 cups because that is all that I need for my recipe today. And some of you maybe have never even heard of rhubarb, but you saw my plant and it looks kind of like celery. A much thicker, different color celery, but it's kind of the same texture, and of course it's in a big stalk like celery. And while I'm getting all of this cut up, I'm almost to 3 cups now. I might even do 4 cups actually. But I'm going to turn on my water and get it to a boil. And this is, about 3/4 full of water, this pan here. I'm also going to turn my oven on to 350. Once I finish this rhubarb, I'll tell you what recipe we're making today. Once my water comes up to a boil, I'm going to scald the rhubarb, which is kind of like blanching, just to get it a little bit soft. And then I've got a 9x9 casserole pan that I've greased with butter. I should tell you what the recipe is today. One of my viewers sent me their family cookbook. Her name is Pat, and this is her family's cookbook that was her mother's recipes and other family members. But it is so amazing. And this recipe right here, rhubarb upside down cake. I knew as soon as I saw it, I wanted to make this recipe with my rhubarb. Thank you so much, Pat, for sending this to me. What a wonderful thing to share. And now I get to share it with all of you. I love family cookbooks like this. They are tried and true recipes, and usually even better than ones that you can find now. Of course, I feel like a lot of recipes evolve over time, but they all start somewhere. So I'm so excited to make this recipe. Let me get this out of the way. I don't want to get any food on it. Of course, my version will be gluten-free. It will also be sugar-free. And I've also decided to add in some other ingredients as well. I really like the pairing of rhubarb with strawberries. And a couple of years ago, I bought some freeze-dried strawberries. The main reason I bought them is because I thought it would be a really delicious thing to use freeze-dried strawberries crushed up in some kind of cake or frosting. I'm not rehydrating my freeze-dried strawberries. I'm leaving them as is. And the reason for that is rhubarb can be really liquidy. If you've ever made a strawberry rhubarb pie or something like that, it can turn out really liquidy. So my plan for this, of course, we are going to be scalding the rhubarb, but if I leave the strawberries dry, they will absorb a lot of this extra moisture from the rhubarb and make a really delicious cake, or so I hope. And it is an upside down cake, but I don't think I'll be turning it right side up once it's baked. We'll see. I've not made this recipe before, so you guys get to experience it the same time I do. And while I'm waiting for my water to come up to a boil, I can mix my dry ingredients together. And all that is 2 cups of my gluten-free flour mix, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I'm just going to lightly mix this together. Salt is actually not in the original recipe. But the reason I'm adding salt is I feel like salt in desserts just brings out the flavor a little bit more. Almonds are not in the recipe either, but I really like to use nuts in my desserts. I think it adds a little bit more protein, and I like the crunch. I'm also adding in some orange peel, some vanilla, and of course an egg, because my flour does not have any binder in it, and so I use the egg for that. And then of course I am not using sugar. The original recipe calls for brown sugar, so I'm using a combination of date sugar, honey, and molasses to kind of give me that flavor that brown sugar would. And 3 tablespoons of butter and 1 cup of milk. And I've got everything at room temperature. My water is up to a boil, so I'm going to dump in my rhubarb very carefully. And my oven is also preheated, so I'm going to get my almonds toasting. This is the first rhubarb recipe that I've made that asks to scald or blanch the rhubarb. Other recipes that I've made, you just cook it or it cooks in whatever you're cooking it in. But I'm assuming the reason we want it partially cooked before we bake it is because it will probably not be done by the time the top of the cake is done. And maybe it's to release some of the liquid. We'll see. And the recipe doesn't give a time on how long to blanch this for or scald it for. I think this is good. I've got a strainer. I've cooked a lot of things with rhubarb before, but I'm really surprised by how this changes the color. I'm just gonna let this drain and cool off a little bit while we get the rest of our ingredients together. One of the things that I love about the older recipes, like I'm using today, is they don't really give very many instructions. Sometimes they just give you a list of ingredients. But if you have a basic knowledge of cooking, you can most of the time figure it out. So this recipe says to use the other ingredients to make a batter. I don't know if the butter is supposed to be melted or not, so I'm just doing the method that I know, which is creaming the butter and the sugar and the eggs and then the other things. But I've got 3 tablespoons of butter here that's pretty well room temperature. It might be a little bit firmer than room temperature, but it will mix up. Or just get stuck in your whisk. It might need to go in the microwave for just a minute. Let's try that again. Oh, perfect. Almost on the melting point, but really soft and able to whisk around. I'm going to get my egg ready while my nuts are finishing up. And I usually feel these nuts to see how hot they are. And of course, when nuts are getting toasted, they get really fragrant. So those are ready. The other thing about this recipe is it doesn't give you a temperature of what to bake it at. And so I'm just going with good old 350. So this is a half a cup of honey and 1 teaspoon of molasses. This would be 1 cup of brown sugar. Again, this is for the batter part. You kind of do this recipe in 2 stages. One of my viewers recently commented about using some kind of cooking spray or oil in your measuring cup when you're measuring out honey, and then it comes out of the container so much easier. And I thought about it too late, and I had already measured out my honey, but I definitely will try that. Thank you for giving me that tip, and thank you all for giving me all of the tips that you give me. So many people have so many good tips or suggestions that you leave in the comments. Thank you so much. I know sometimes it takes me a few days or sometimes longer, especially on Instagram, to reply to you guys. I try to get to those as soon as possible. Even if I don't respond right away, I do read all of the comments. So keep them coming and know that it is appreciated even if I don't respond right away. So I'm just mixing my butter and my honey together. And I also want to say thank you so much to my patrons. I cannot say thank you enough to you guys that are here supporting me. And also thank you to everybody that watches my videos and always comments. Thank you guys so much. This channel really wouldn't be what it is without all of you guys watching. And those of you that share, you guys share on your Facebook, you share on your own Instagram. Thank you so much for sharing my content with other people. So my honey and my butter and molasses are mixed together. I'm going to add in my 1 egg, my 1 teaspoon of vanilla, which is also not in the recipe, my orange peel, and this is about 1 tablespoon of orange zest. I really like the combination of orange with rhubarb and strawberry. Of course, you could leave this out altogether, or you could add in some lemon zest, either or. And then I'm just going to give this a really good mix. And this is such a small amount of batter for such a big bowl, but that's just fine. I'm going to pour in my 1 cup of milk. I'm going to move this aside. I'm not adding in my dry ingredients just yet. I'm thinking this cake batter, because there's 2 teaspoons of baking powder, it will kind of puff up like pancakes or biscuits. And I don't want to add it too soon to my cake batter. So I'm going to get my rhubarb and strawberries mixed together. And I don't care if there's a little bit of extra liquid from the rhubarb. That will be absorbed by my freeze-dried strawberries. and mix in my strawberries and give this a really good mix. And I think this rhubarb is actually a perfect texture. Pat, you'll have to let me know if I'm doing this recipe the way your mom did it. And I'm almost thinking that maybe I should have put more rhubarb. So what the recipe says is you get your rhubarb and you put it in a buttered casserole dish, but I'm thinking I probably could have gone as much as 6 cups of rhubarb. So I'm just going to spread out my fruit mixture here. And maybe it's actually the perfect amount of filling. If you've ever made an upside down cake before, it's usually just a layer of fruit and then of course some kind of sugar, and then you put the cake batter on top. So it actually might be the right amount. So that's done there. I haven't forgot about my nuts. I was debating whether or not to mix them in with the cake batter or just sprinkle them on top. And I think I might just sprinkle them on top of the cake or mix them in. I'm still deciding. So the recipe says that once you've got your rhubarb in the bottom of the pan, you're supposed to cover it generously with brown sugar. That's where my date sugar is coming in. And I was also debating whether or not to use coconut sugar or date sugar. But I'm going with date sugar, and this is almost a cup. And just looking by the amount I've got in here, I don't think I'm going to use all of it. But I'm just going to sprinkle it on a generous layer. Get over here to the corners, and it's all right if there's some little chunks in there. And you know, I'm thinking this would be easily doubled and put in a 9x13 pan. And I'm also thinking that you could do this in a round cake pan and then just flip it over when you're done. I still might flip it over depending on how it bakes up. And then we'd be able to see our delicious rhubarb on the top. And you know, I started out with not quite a cup of date sugar. And I'm not even down to a half a cup yet. But I really feel like this is a really good layer of sugar on here. So set that aside, and I'm going to get my nuts cut up. Now that I've got all of my nuts cut up, I've decided that I think I want to have the layer of fruit, the layer of date sugar, and a layer of nuts. I think that would actually be a really good idea. So I'm just going to sprinkle on a nut layer here. And because nuts are not in the recipe, I'm just eyeballing how much to put on here. This is probably about 1.5 cups chopped almonds. And I didn't think I would use them all, but I am going to use them all. Get that into an even layer. I was afraid that this pan would be a little bit more full, which it might be after we mix up the cake batter. So I think I'm going to bake my cake on a cookie sheet, just in case. And get this out of the way. I'm going to give my cake batter a good whisk. Switch to my spatula and just dump in my dry ingredients. Of course, this is a little bit more liquidy than what the recipe would have been because I do have an egg in here. Bring my cake pan closer and just pour this on. And then I'm just going to spread it out. I don't think it will go up over the sides, but you never know. Okay, it sure looks pretty. The layers in there, very nice. Into the oven for about 40 minutes. As with any cake, you kind of feel it to see if it's springy on top. Even though it's golden brown around the edges, it doesn't feel very springy in the very center. And that last little toothpick trick that I did, it wasn't exactly clean. So, back in the oven. I'll go 10 minutes to start. Close the rack before you close the door. And I'm just going in several places here. I think it's done. I don't mind if the edges are a little bit dark. But man, it sure smells good. I imagine something like this you can serve warm, although it's pretty hot right out of the oven. I like it to cool off a little bit on the cooling rack. That way it doesn't continue cooking on this hot cookie sheet. And it's not even sticking to the sides at all. So I really think we could flip this out maybe. We'll see. I want it to cool off a little bit more. And I don't know that I will invert the pan. I'm afraid that the fruit might stick to the bottom of the pan. Pat, let me know if your mom used to flip it out and serve it upside down. I'm assuming so because the name of the recipe is Rhubarb Upside Down Cake. I'm going to let this cool off and then we'll either cut into it or flip it upside down and then cut into it. That's just some heavy cream that I whipped. And my cake has been cooling for about an hour. It's still warm on the bottom, so I'm going to leave it on the cooling rack. But I really think it will be good warm. And you probably don't even need a knife. But I'm just going to cut into it. And then I'll flip my piece over upside down on my plate. Turn it around, get a better angle here. As with anything, the first piece is always the challenge. Let's see if I can get it to flip over. Oh, there we go. It sure looks good. Considering my fruit to cake ratio, I really could have put a lot more fruit and rhubarb in there. And it looks like I missed some of my filling here. And I actually forgot that I put nuts in it. I'm going to turn this around so hopefully you can see. But it really holds the slice so well. And then I've just got some sweetened whipped cream here. Nothing fancy. This would probably be really good with ice cream. Let's give it a bite. Make sure to get fruit and nuts and cake in there. And whipped cream. That is really good. That is a great cake. Rhubarb is a pretty tart, sour flavored vegetable. That's why it's most commonly paired with other fruits like strawberries or raspberries. Paired with raisins is actually really good. Even though I don't like raisins very much, but they're a really good combination. In fact, I usually make a rhubarb raisin pie about once a year for my grandparents. But it really is so good. In fact, I think next time, which I will make this again, it's that good. I think I would actually do maybe 2 more cups of rhubarb. You see how much they cook down. And I'm not getting a lot of strawberry flavor, but just a hint. And that orange peel in there is just a little bit of a hint of orange as well. And this cake is just a basic cake, but so good. And of course, whipped cream on top. You could serve this with ice cream or with nothing. It's actually really good. Even without the whipped cream, it would be good. I would say this is a winner of a recipe. I'll definitely be making this again. So delicious. If you've never had rhubarb, I encourage you to try this recipe. I know I do have other rhubarb recipes on my channel, but this recipe I feel like would be a really good introduction to rhubarb if you've never had it before. Even if you didn't like it as a kid, and maybe now you want to revisit rhubarb, try this recipe. There's not a whole lot in here, and you've got other things that go with it, and that might be a really good introduction to trying rhubarb. Thank you again to Pat for sending me her family cookbook so I could enjoy this recipe, and I'm sure many, many others. Thank you so much. And as always, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next one.